I'm Tim, welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. Today we're discussing the Zenith El Primero Stratos Flyback with striking 10th caliber. You can see and you can purchase this versatile sports watch on our website. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you enjoy these videos, and please click on the card in the upper right hand corner of the screen at any time during this video to see our full sales listing for this watch with accessories included in the sale, high resolution images for your desktop, and naturally complete pricing details for this Zenith El Primero Stratos Flyback. Now on my wrist, 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference, you can see that this watch, one of the stars of the 2011 Baselworld show, is large and expressive. While it does have some heritage design elements, it's very much of our age, not a past one. Now, Zenith advertises this as a 45.5mm case. I will say that my measurement across the narrowest diagonal of the round case measured 46.5, so it definitely has the wrist presence to match a 46+ mm sizing, and I think 45.5 is optimistic, but again, for fit purposes, it doesn't matter. The watch wears well on a small wrist like mine. This is the most compact 46+ I've ever experienced. In terms of thickness, frankly, it isn't. It's not as tall as you'd expect. 14mm thick, it fairly easily slides underneath most sleeves and cuffs, not just blazers, not just sport jackets and loose sweaters, but even some formal attire. It's a versatile timepiece aesthetically. Now, from lug to lug, it's 54mm across the horizontal extremity of the case, but you're not going to find that that impedes its use on smaller wrists. Although my wrist is 16 centimeters in circumference, I believe you could wear this, frankly, oversized watch on a wrist down to as small as 15 centimeters, and here's why. You can see that the lugs are short cropped and dramatically angled, so even though it's big, it wraps itself around the periphery of your wrist rather than flaring out stridently. That could create an awkward aesthetic. Here, they're nicely curved and they really do trace the arc of your wrist. There's also, despite the conforming end pieces that create a very integrated and handsome look, there's no tendency for this massive strap to want to flare and fight the curve of your wrist. Oftentimes when you close the gap to the flank of the case with an end piece or a conforming strap profile, it wants to flare and fight. Not here. Zenith carefully considered ergonomics. The strap is an impressive piece too. You can see a dramatic shear cut allows it to swell to match the flare of the lugs. Visually very congruent, very handsome, but it also features a gorgeous large rectangular scale gloss black alligator leather with monotone stitch, and on the bottom a rubber inlay. This is Zenith's fashion in the modern era that separates the leather from the oil and the moisture of the wrist for long wearing durability. The clasp is substantial, all of stainless steel. You can see all but the top of the buckle is of high polish. There are no rough machined burrs, no relics of stamping. It's beautifully made, beautifully finished, and with twin trigger release, you do have to positively disengage it to pop it open. It's not friction fit. It gives you a lot of peace of mind and a lot of security. Now you'll note that the watch features a nuanced finish. In spite of its size, it definitely derives its impact from sheer scale, but the compound curves of the side are handsome, and all of high polish along with the bevel, they contrast with the satin finished top of the lugs. You can see that the bezel itself features a knurling that makes it easy to grip, and it has a pronounced dish such that its outer circumference is higher physically than its inner circumference. It's handsome, and it exposes the nicely domed box section sapphire. A sapphire that's flat is fairly inexpensive to make. A sapphire with a pronounced box section and camber to it becomes very, very expensive, and you can see Zenith did not cut costs in any respect with this watch. It is full featured in every detail, and you'll note that the insert of the bezel, which is unidirectional rotating in dive style, is made of scratch resistant ceramic, effectively as hale and hardy as the sapphire itself and just as scuff resistant. Now there is a luminescent pearl in the bezel, so while this watch is frankly a general sports watch, nevertheless with the unidirectional rotating luminescent bezel, the constant seconds indicator, 100-meter diving capability, and it meets the ISO standard for anti-magnetic and shock-resistant watches. The 6425 dive watch specification is met by this watch, giving it an extra layer of versatility. 100-meter water resistance. Now, the dial speaking of depth, has a great deal of it. You can see there are separate tracks. There's the applied and faceted indices for the hours, and the dial is fully luminescent, sports watch style. Outboard of that, minute hashes, and then outboard of that, there's an elevated scale with a little bit of a sloped metallic ray halt that features fractional second calibrations. And what you're looking at is the index at 12 marked 10. Now when you activate the striking 10th movement, caliber 4057, you can see we're making 10-second circuits of the dial. It's like a foudroyant, but more practical, because it spreads the time of a single second over the equivalent of 6 seconds on a conventional dial. So I can actually use the El Primero's 1/10 of a second resolution. In the past, yes, it had that capability, but reading such a small second-to-second scale on a conventional dial just wasn't practical. So now you can read this with ease. So I start at the index at 10, and I know that that mark right there is 1 second, so I just count the tenths of a second, and I find myself counting 9/10 of a second that easily. It's the fastest you've ever read fractional seconds on a chronograph. Now the only, perhaps, drawback of this system is that you do lose the hour counter. You'll note that there is a 1-minute counter at 3 o'clock, and there is a 60-minute counter at 6 o'clock. There's constant seconds at 9. I would say that the ability to use the El Primero to its full potential is easily worth the trade-off. Plus, it's visually spectacular, and it has a flyback, so you can reset and restart it with flyback action simply by pressing the pusher at 4 o'clock on the dial. I mentioned this is a sports watch, and it truly is. Good for diving, good for general activity, good for aviation with the chronograph and the flyback. This watch truly does it all with a discrete date window, metal framed at 6 o'clock. I said this watch doesn't cut costs, and I truly mean it. It also has a little bit of vintage flair in that the dial with the overlapping subregisters and the multicolored treatment does recall the old 1970 A386, one of Zenith's great design classics. Now you can see on the case back, it's an El Primero, but hot rodded. There's a 100-tooth silicon star inset wheel that drives the striking 10th, and I say star inset because its spokes form a star. It drives the striking 10th mechanism. You can see the traditional El Primero balance beating away at 36,000 vibrations per hour, or 10 beats per second, 5 hertz. The winding mass is partly skeletonized, which allows you easy visual access to the movement, and you'll note that it is a column wheel chronograph in the great tradition of the El Primero, the more expensive and frankly more demanding way to build and tune a chronograph, but it gives you tactile and audible pleasure when you operate the mechanism. It clicks, it's crisp, it's very satisfying to operate. 52-hour power reserve, in spite of the spectacular 10 beat per second rate. It will be less if you're running the chronograph, but consider that they're achieving 10 beats per second and 52 hours of power reserve in an industry that considers 8 beats per second and 40 to 42 hours to be standard. Zenith gives you more. There's also beautiful finish across the movement, although mostly machine finished. Nevertheless, you do see that there is brushing on the levers, both polished and blued screws, polished assembling components, blued screws being used to tune functional components, such as the civil time rate or the chronograph, beautifully finished wheels, and a tight and even perlage across all of the bridges. It's handsome as well as sophisticated. This is a watch that truly does it all. You can see it, and you could put it on your wrist. You can even have it do it all for you if you start by visiting our website.